And Brad, take the baton.
Okay, thanks, Brian. I wanted to mention at the beginning too that this session grew out of a conversation I had with Jim Butler. We were talking about this, and he goes about aging, and he said you should do a session on this, the adult ed, and so here we are. So thanks, Jim. Well, it's my pleasure to welcome and introduce to you two remarkable people who represent together a massive range of expertise and experience on our topic tonight. So let me just introduce them each to you. And then first, Floy Biggs. She's has more than 4 decades of experience in both nonprofit and profit sectors managing senior and long-term care programs. And she serves as the CEO of Aging Next, which is down in the Village area of Claremont. She's been down there since 2006. And she's well respected. She's integrated into the senior services community in our region. She's also licensed skilled nursing facility administrator. She earned an undergraduate degree in gerontology and an MA in health administration from USC. And so she's also active besides in her agency there, Aging Next. She's engaged in the community. She serves on the boards of the Claremont Community on Aging, Claremont Chamber of Commerce, and the Park Tree Community Health Center. So that's Floy. And also with us is Dr. Kelly Niles-Yoakum. And she received a doctorate in gerontology in 2006 with a concentration in aging policy. And she studied at the University of Maryland in Baltimore. She's currently a professor of gerontology and public administration at the University of Laverne. And she's the past president of the California Council on Gerontology and Geriatrics, president of Niles Consulting. And her research interests and areas of expertise include services and programs, older adults, end-of-life issues, aging policy, empowerment in later life, and gerontological education. She's also published extensively on issues related to aging and public administration. She's the author of several books, including The Aging Networks, A Guide to Policy, Programs and Services. Another work, Social Theories of Aging. And I also noted that she's published a couple of books of poetry, so she's also a poet. So welcome to both of you. We're so grateful to have you with us. And at this point, I just gladly hand over tonight's session to you. So thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Brian and Brad, for having us, and for all of you on this Monday evening. Floy and I are happy to be here. Let me see if I can share. I mean, we've been doing this online teaching for so long now. I'm going to share my screen. And there we go. Put this in. Okay. Everybody see that? Mm-hmm. So a few disclaimers here. We're all in our homes, as we have been for the last 2 years. I have a few dogs who are quiet at the moment. And my son brought home a few chicks. So they're peeping in the background. They're very quiet right now, but I will throw things to Floy and we'll tag team if it gets chaotic in my neck of the woods here. So thank you again for having us. So Brian and Brad gave us some things to think about, some really great questions and prompts. And so I hope that Floy and I can address those in a thoughtful way. And I have to remember that, you know, I'm not in a classroom. It's been a while since I have spoken in front of a group that weren't students. So we're a small enough group here. So if anybody, I think the way that Floy and I like to do these kinds of things is to have a discussion. And so, you know, feel free to interrupt us, raise your hand, as Brian said, you know, either through the, you know, hand emoji or, you know, yell at us, interrupt us as we go through here. So that sound good, Floy?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. All right, let's see if we can do this. I put this in here because I've been teaching gerontology for about 20 years. And I spent probably, half of that time teaching undergraduates. And one of the exciting things about teaching that particular population, the 18 to 22-year-olds, traditional undergrads, is that sometimes they show up in my classroom thinking they're in a geology class, right? That is this not a geology class? I don't know what is gerontology. So we're starting from a very blank slate with most of them. And I throw this out at them, right? You've seen one old person, you've seen one old person. And that starts a very important discussion, because I think, Brian and Brad, one of the big things that I really enjoyed in terms of what you gave us to think about, and those who are with us today, is how does society view aging, right? How do we think about aging? What are societal perceptions of aging? And one of them is that all old people are the same, right? Anybody over the age of 65, and for some it's 40 or 50, right? Depends on the generation that you're talking to. And what I try to do in my classroom and to groups that I'm talking to is besides this group, right? We all know that. I'm preaching to the choir here. Is that this is a very diverse group of people, and becoming even more diverse, particularly in the state of California. So anyway, this is just a kind of reminder, right, that not every old person is the same. And that's where I'm going to start off with the societal views. So one quote that is very, I use it a lot, Simone de Beauvoir. If anybody has read, I don't know if anybody's read Coming of Age. It's an old book. I do require it in one of my classes, and the students, kind of complain and whine about it. But once you get into it, it's a very enlightening read. And this is a quote that I think is very important for all of us. And you can read it, but I'll read it here. Since it is the other within us who is old, it is natural that the revelation of our age should come to us from outside, from others. And this is particularly important because it gets to the crux of the societal views and perceptions of aging. It is the external messages, I think, that we get about aging, and where ageism comes from. So I'm going to change my grid view here so I can try to see. Floyd, you can, if you see anybody who wants to interrupt us or say something,
I will.
You can stop me here. So those are a couple of things. Wait, am I back on there? Oh, there we go. Okay, so to the kind of prompt or discussion item about aging, how does our society view aging? I mean, I teach whole classes on ageism. There are books on ageism. And so, but I do have hope. I think things are changing. And a couple of things, current things that have kind of ripped the Band-Aid off of the last ism that's actually acceptable, which is ageism, is COVID. COVID has really kind of exposed, I think, a lot of things related to aging, and forced us to look at things in a different way. I mean, I might be fantasizing about that because it's my area, but that's my hope. So I talk about this in two ways. We have ideal views of aging, and then the perceived real views of aging. And I'll go into this a little bit more. So we have these ideal views, which are, that old people are wise, that over your lifetime, you accumulate this wisdom. And wisdom is defined in a variety of different ways. But also, it's interesting because the wisdom part of it can be a stereotype, right? That it's this wise old person. Every old person has this wisdom. And even in my family, I have a lot of old people who are not that wise. So it's also a stereotype. There's the self-sufficiency part of it. We get that when we get our AARP magazines, while the old people are, skiing down the mountain, handling things on their own. handling it, staying active is also another part of that, and earned leisure, right? So kind of we have put together this ideal perception of what aging is. Then we have this perceived real version, which is sadly, when I work with my undergrads, I look at them and I say, so I have like 50 of them in a classroom, and I say, okay, everybody, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when I say the word old? And, they stare at me. It's first day of class. They're not really sure what's happening. Is it a trick question? I think they think, is this a trick question? How should I answer this? So after I disarm everybody, those real views of aging that they have, that have come from a variety of sources, we write on the board, and those are in the form of deterioration, not having control, they're dependent. So but I've saved a lot of that. I've presented on this at conferences where I show, the whole blackboard, where I get them to walk up there and write things down. So there's things like they smell, they're mean, they can't drive. So, those are real things, and it really begs the question, where does that come from? So I appreciated the societal part of this question and this prompt of that, related to that. So as I mentioned, the COVID and the reality of old, I don't know, when this started, if anybody remembers how older adults were cast in this particular situation. And I was invited to do a radio spot in the very beginning, and I, with a UCLA, they had me as a gerontologist, and they had a UCLA geriatrics professor, and we spent quite a long time talking about social media and COVID in the very early stages, and the examples are on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, where people were saying it's just old people, right? Maybe it's time for them to die anyway, right? We don't have to worry about this. And that is a very real, that was a very real situation. And I really think that that's carried over. And my hope is that we've come to a place where we really are thinking about aging in a different way. So COVID, the other things, the other part of being old in the time of COVID that was very important, and Floyd can talk about this and the experiences of, her staff and her clients and the people that Aging Next serves, their experience of trying to work through COVID it's just incredible. So we had people dying alone. My own grandmother, we watched her die through a window. And if that doesn't hit home to people, that not only are older adults important, but we need to really start thinking about this differently. And that leads into the industry part of it, where the front line was not protected. I recently wrote a chapter about the disappearing front line. Those folks who, the direct care workers who serve older adults, not being protected, not making the money that they should be making, and then going home and expecting to be around their families. So it's a very complex issue, but COVID, as I said, kind of ripped the Band-Aid off of that, so we could start having these discussions like we're having now. And I do believe we might be at a point where age perhaps is an equalizer. I mean, that's my hope. And Floyd, do you want to add to this about your experience with Aging Next? I mean, I know it was a struggle for all of your programs and services and the staff. And
yeah, I mean, you pretty well summed up the whole last 2 years. It was really a struggle. And one of the biggest struggles for us was that we're a volunteer first model. So the majority of our volunteers were over the age of 65. So we were really, when we were all told to shelter in place, we were really without the volunteers that, do the companionship, do the friendly visits, provide the meals and things like that. We were really in a big pickle with not having enough due to age, and not having enough people to serve, the thousands that we serve yearly. So yeah, it was quite an interesting time. Getting better now, but a little blip the last month or so, but things are getting better.
I think things are getting better.
Yeah,
So
there you go.
So I show this to my students and they laugh. And I show this on purpose because it is an exaggeration, right? It's an exaggeration. And my undergrad, my graduate students are much more refined, right? And they say, that's awful. My undergraduate students laugh, and there's so much laughter and talking. And yeah, that's what it's like. Really? Really? Is that what it's like? So, it's just a photo that represents the very, gets to the very heart of how our society actually feels about older adults, that they are caricatures of themselves. And most of our kind of debunking of this comes from students from other countries. So I feel grateful that we have such a diverse group where I'm teaching and where I've always been teaching, that they are there to remind us that globally and around the world, there are different views of aging. That however the Western world, or the United States in particular, feels about older adults, that is not how the rest of the world feels about aging. And it's really an opportunity to step back and think about the social construction, right? How we put all of this together and how this came to be. So it's an awful picture, but it's a reminder. So I'll go quickly through. I'm not keeping track of Brian, how much time should we? Oh, we're getting close, right? So
We should probably leave about 15-20 minutes at the end for questions and conversation.
Okay, so I'll go quickly through these, and I'm happy to send this to you if you want to share this, or you're recording, so that'll be fine. So just a quick reminder about ageism. These, we're probably all familiar with this, but those attitudes that are held about older adults, and the reminder that ageism can be negative and positive. Bob Binstock is a colleague of mine who's no longer with us, but he, in the 70s, he came up with a term called compassionate ageism. So it can be negative, like the photo that we just saw, but it also comes in the form of compassion. And that is doing too much for, thinking about older adults or older women as the grandmother who's on the rocking chair on the porch. And that's her role in society, is to bake cookies and just tell stories. So just a reminder that it's positive and negative. And the types of ageism comes in many different ways to us, which is personal, institutional, and cultural. And all of these are very important, and the kind of intersection about all of these, they're all intersected in a variety of different ways, right? Okay, so here's the other part that Brian and Brad had us think about, Floy and I think about, which are considerations of care. And I kind of, took license. Floy and I talked about this, and I thought, well, how should we think about this for all of you, for this particular audience? And I've been doing work on caregiving for a couple of decades now, and working caregivers, informal versus formal caregivers, and I'm really happy to see that we're kind of moving from the term, this is in kind of the terminology, the term caregiving, to care work, because it is work, right? It's a lot of work, and caregivers are the default long-term care system in this country. And there's just not enough attention given to that. And what that means is that caregivers, family caregivers in particular, are oftentimes the ones that are doing all the out-of-pocket financial part of it, the hours before work, after work, all of that stuff. So we kind of decided to break it down into these pieces here, which are the components of taking care of others, right? So that's the care work. But then also taking care of the caregiver, right? In my research, what I find is that a lot of caregivers do not identify as caregivers, that we, and particularly women, we've been socialized in such a way that this is just what I'm supposed to do. And cultural, there's a cultural part of that too, right? You're expected to do this. This is what we do in our family. But identifying as a caregiver really is very important. And that's a step that's not often even thought about. And so we invite people to also check their perspectives because, and the know thyself is there because there's a lot, it's not just the care, particularly for families. It's family history, it's family baggage. It's a complex situation when you talk about family caregiving. And so that's just a reminder about that. And that, no, you can't do it all. We think we can, right? And in this society, we're supposed to do it all. Go to work, take care of your kids, particularly if you're a sandwich generation. And sandwich generation folks, Floyd's nodding her head. Those are the folks that are caring for children that are under 18 and also caring for aging parents. And if they're in that situation, they're probably working and have all of these other things going on. And so at the end of this presentation, Floyd and I have some resources as well, if people want to follow up on some of this stuff. So a lot of the research and a lot of the things that we hear about caregiving is the good side, right? I'm honored to do it. It's not a burden. This is my role. This is my job as a daughter or a son. But the truth behind it that I think is not often talked about is that it's really hard. And there are some things that come with that if we talked about it more, right? If we brought it out into the light and acknowledged it a little bit more, it wouldn't be such a hidden part of caregiving. And that is the isolation. It can be very isolating. Your people at work don't always want to hear about it. Your friends don't want to hear about it all the time. The expectations that come with caregiving and the guilt that can often come. And sometimes that comes at the end of life. I don't know how many of you with us today have been caregivers and in particular been the caregiver of somebody at the end of their life. But sometimes there are caregivers who feel relieved when someone passes. And there's a lot of guilt that comes with that. And so, to not normalize that and to not be open and to accept that kind of keeps that in the dark and keeps people even more isolated and feeling guilty about that. And there are those moments, right? There are the moments that we treasure. There's the moments that remind us of our place and where we are in the process. So that's why we said the good, the bad, and I wanted to say the ugly, but we did away with that and said the stuff no one told you about or no one talks about. So I am not going to go through all of this because I clearly put this together like we had a 3-hour lecture hall here. But I did address with Floyd, we talked about this, some, balancing autonomy and support, which I think, leads right into this. So your prompts and your questions were really well laid out here, Brian and Brad, for us. So if people want to look more at this, I have some information about what empowerment is. My dissertation was about empowerment and the factors that lead to empowerment and disempowerment in a caregiving context. And so this is just the information about the model, and there's a little bit of theory here. People want to go back to that. And the basic elements of empowerment, and you can see how this connects to caregiving, right? Elements of empowerment are to give somebody a voice and to also allow somebody to have control over their choices, to have personal control, and then to have choices. So personal control and choice are listed separately there. They're separate elements. I won't go into that, but I think it's important to remember that the caregiver needs to feel empowered, but we also need to remember to not take that away from the care recipient. And that is something that happens sometimes just by accident, right? I hate to talk about children and older adults, but I had to check myself with my kids, right? If I want them to do something, I can't. I have to let them do it in their own way. And anybody in our lives, we have to let them do it in their own way. That's no different from somebody you're providing care to, right? Even if we don't agree, we might not agree. I've done interviews in this context a lot, and the family caregivers will often say, "Well, she doesn't do that right, or she doesn't know what's right for her." And then I go separately and interview, the mother or the grandmother, and she'll say, "Well, she doesn't trust me. She doesn't let me do this." So, again, just to check thyself in those particular moments. Okay, I'll skip through this. Here are the aging resources that Floyd and I put together for you. There's a really interesting website that has a lot of great information if you're interested in the topic of addressing how aging is viewed in our society. It's Reframing Aging. And the Gauging Aging is really it's a publication that you can order. And then there's the Reframing Aging. And then the frameworks is that the guide that they put together. So if anybody has an interest in that, there are some things there. And this is a wordle that I have my students, when they do research, it's an interesting research tool where it takes the major themes and words that people say when we talk to them. And those are the largest ones you see there. So I just threw that in there. And I know, do you want us to come back? Floyd, do you want to talk about your stuff, your programs and services and how you've addressed some of this, or how do you want to do that?
Yeah, Brian and Brad, do you want to take questions now, or y'all see why I invited Kelly to join tonight, since she is the true expert on.
No, I dominate. I feel
the age. No, you do. But
Why don't you share, Floyd, about Aging Next and some of the stuff that you want to share?
I mean, I think three empowerment that Kelly talked about: voice, personal control, and choice. That's really the key to Aging Next. Aging Next is your local resource for resources for older adults who are aging in their own homes and their families. We support and educate older adults and their families to maintain independence and to age well at home and in the community we live. We, having a voice and allowing people to have personal control and choice is really the key to where we are. Kelly, you have control on this, or do I? I can't even tell. Yeah, so we believe in the power of community. I mean, at Aging Next, the key to our success is partnering with many organizations in the community. We are a plethora of organizations and resources for people who are dealing with aging, whether they're families, whether they're the older adult themselves. We're here to help. We really believe in planning today for a brighter tomorrow. We all are aging. It's inevitable. And so to stay on course, to really build that safety net under you as you're aging, that's what we're here to do. That's what we've been doing for 46 years. And we want everybody to live their best life at every age, no matter their age, from young to old. So that's really our key. So we have 6 core programs here at Aging Next. Again, we're located in Claremont, but we serve 16 cities here in the Inland Empire. Aging Next Village is a program, super cool program. And I see Bill Reed on the call tonight, and he is a member of Aging Next Village. And it's a growing movement in California and in the nation. It's a virtual community for active, vibrant seniors that are aging at home. It's, again, building a safety net as we age. So often we can't always depend on our children or our neighbors. So it's building that support system as we move through this aging journey. It's a big social component. We have volunteers. And we have great educational opportunities, affinity groups, and all different kinds of fun things that people can do. Often people that have recently moved to the community or possibly lost a spouse or simply looking to make some new friends. It's a great way to get social, get back in the community. And we have about 140 members of our village now, but it is a nationwide movement. A great website to check out is villagemovementcalifornia.org, which is the coalition of all the villages in California. It's a really, really exciting movement. So our memory care center is over at Larkin Park here in Claremont. Program we've had for the past 35 years. You can bring your loved one with mild to moderate dementia and drop them off for the day for them to have adult stimulating activities while you as the caregiver get some respite from caregiving. Again, we did start it 35 years ago to give families respite from caregiving. Care Partners is one of really neat program. It's a program that fixed income seniors are providing companionship to other seniors in their own homes. It's in the cities listed there. It's a really, really neat program we've had for 40 years. It's free and it's non-medical companionship, grocery shopping, a walk, or just having a cup of coffee with someone that maybe you know that's isolated or homebound in their own home. Great, great, lovely program. Volunteers, we are a volunteer first model. We have about 500 volunteers here at Aging Next that are providing all different kinds of services in the community in all different locations. Anybody interested in volunteering, we are here to sign you up as quick as we can. So that's the majority of our volunteers are over the age of 65, but we do have some younger volunteers now, and especially during COVID, we were able to attract a lot of the students from the colleges that weren't able to get home. Often many foreign students that we at one point were delivering over 500 meals in the community to people who were at home. And most of those meals were being delivered by graduate students. So it was really neat to get younger people involved, and they're sticking around too, which is really, really fun to get a younger set. And they have a whole different attitude about aging now. So it's really, really neat. Ride and Go is our transportation program. We have a volunteer driver program and a travel reimbursement program. If you need a ride, which transportation, when I started doing this 43 years ago, transportation was the #1 problem, and it still is. How do we get where we need to go from point A to point B? So we do have some great volunteer driver programs. Volunteers that just want to drive people, get to know people, have a relationship with people, and get them where they need to go. Again, during COVID, we had a lot of younger people that came and said, hey, I'd be happy to drive to essential services to get people what they need. And then resource specialists. Those are the people that have the information and referral, all the resources that you need. We have people that call from all different cities that need resources, and we have a wealth of resources available to get you what you need when you need it here at Aging Next. That's our goal. So that kind of gives you a quick overview. Always here to take phone calls. And we also have support groups that meet every Wednesday night for people that are caregiving. Really neat way from 6:30 to 8. You can jump on and really talk to other people that are caregiving, and kind of gives you a good perspective on what's happening. It doesn't make you feel so alone if you are caregiving. So, yeah, what will you do next to live your best life? Anytime, give us a call, and we're here and available. Yeah, that's just it. Work with a lot of people in the community.
I might live my best life if I had one of those jackets. How come?
Yeah, okay.
Did I leave the board too soon?
Yeah, you did. Or maybe you want a t-shirt.
Can you go back to that screen with the contact information, please?
Oh yeah, there you go. Right here?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, our office is here, right here in Claremont, but again, we do serve 16 cities from Rancho Cucamonga out to West Covina, but always available. And I think that, I'm sure that they're have lots of information that we can give you. Be happy to drop any information off or mail anybody information. But yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell, quickly speaking.
Brian,
I know Delight, you work with a lot of people in there. I think Delight works with people that are in their homes in the community. I think that's what she does. So you may be a good resource for you. Yeah, Kelly, go.
do you want us to leave? Do you want me to stop sharing or? Okay, I will stop sharing.
All right, I was looking. Brad can't see that I was looking right at him, but Yeah, thank you for all of that great information, for the theory and for the concepts, but then also for the praxis. Where is this hitting the road? And that's it was all really good stuff to hear and to see. But I want to open it up to questions from any of you on the Zoom call here for Kelly or for Floy. Um, yeah.
David, Joe.
I'm just Joe. I have a question for Floy about the care partners. Next, can you explain what that is a little more?
It's a federally funded program. It's fixed income seniors that are providing non-medical companionship to other seniors in their own homes. Usually the other seniors are maybe isolated, alone, possibly disabled, possibly live with a caregiver that needs a break, maybe to get out to the grocery store, and our companion will come in and sit with the loved one while that person is at the grocery store, maybe go for a walk, maybe just read or just chit chat for a while. Yeah, it's a really lovely program, and it's free.
Oh, again, that's what I was going to ask. So it's fixed income seniors who are doing it. Do they get paid for it somehow?
They get a stipend from the federal government of $3 an hour.
Oh, okay. Wow, $3 an hour.
Yes, well, it's tax free, and often it buys the fixed income senior groceries for the month. They can work up to 40 hours a week if they'd like, not work, volunteer 40 hours a week. But many of them, they just we've had companions with the program for 10, 15 years. They just love it, are able to give back to and have a purpose. So it's a really lovely program.
Thank you.
Jim.
You're muted, Jim.
Sorry. Oh, we're in Claremont. We're in a community that has 3 congregate living, at least for seniors. I guess there are more, but 3 major ones. And for a lot of people, there's a big question about whether they would aspire, if they had resources, to living in such a community, or whether they'd like to live independently in their own homes. And it's not, sometimes it's a matter of expense and cost, and people must live in their own homes if they're fortunate enough to own homes that they can retire in. Other times it's a matter of just wanting to stay connected to a larger age cohort, and just be out in the community more, or whatever. And so I'm interested in any feedback that you get about that, as to whether you know of people who are choosing to age at home over entering a senior congregate living facility like a CCRC or a whole life program or anything like that. What would you say about that?
I'll just say a couple words, and then I'll give it to Floy, because she hears a lot about this, on the ground, right, working with folks. But it used to be that aging in place in your own home was the gold standard. That's what everybody wanted, and I think we've turned the page on the definition of home, and what that looks like. And which is great, because living alone in your own home is not always the best way to go, for a variety of reasons. And I'll tell you, I'm working with my parents right now. I live in Claremont as well, and I own a home. And luckily, we've become more friendly for the ADUs, right? And that's a big change as well. Recognizing, our situation here, particularly in California, Southern California. But my mother, who has early stages of dementia, went to she's from Claremont as well. They live in New Mexico now. And she went to Claremont High in the 60s. And so they're very, anxious to get back here. And that's the discussion for them. they don't want to, we know that most people do not want to move back in with their parents, with their kids. They don't want to move in with their kids. So having all of these other options, regardless of finances and what people can afford, is the key, to have, a range of options. Because right now, you're right, Jim. I mean, it is a lot of money. And if you have money, it's not an issue. But there are so many folks who fall between the cracks who aren't necessarily, as the government would define them as living in poverty or poor. It's also middle class people who cannot afford, anything else. So it's an issue, and people are thinking more broadly about it now. It's not just I'm determined to age in my own home and I'm going to die here. It is, what are my other options? And I know Floy hears some different things about that as well.
And I think that's Aging Next Village, and I'll let Bill Reed, who might want to say something about that in a moment. But Aging Next Village is really, we believe, a great option for people who are aging in their own homes. Often people that are already in retirement communities. But again, a community of volunteers, social interaction, and Bill, do you have anything you'd like to say? Because I know you and Pat are aging in your own homes, and they are member volunteers of Aging Next Village. So you're on mute, Bill.
Muted, Bill.
You're on.
Sorry. Yeah, I got a number of comments on this. First thing on Aging Next, and start out that, the old saying that age is just a number, and it really is, because it's really your physical and mental condition, to me, now that they defines aging. Because we have a member in the community where we live in Upland who's 98. He lives by himself. He drives. He's probably more active than I am. And we have friends who are in their late 70s who are almost invalid. And so it really depends. That's, to me, more of a definition of age. When it comes to staying in your homes, I think it's, if you can live in a individual house in one of the senior villages like the Gardens or Hillcrest, or you're living in your own home in some sense. COVID, however, is presented that living in communities has its downside, because it makes you very vulnerable to all the bugs that are being passed around. And their services have dropped because they're having staffing problems. And so things like this. Now, this hopefully is temporary, but it's something else that you have to think about. Getting back to the village, Pat and I have been involved in it since its inception, or just as they were forming. And, it's been a great experience for us, because as volunteers, mainly than a giver of services rather than receiver of services up to now, we've met an awful lot of wonderful people. When you drive people in your general area, so you're not driving very far, but you're also meeting the really a wide variety of very interesting people. Everybody has a story, and I think that's the problem. One last comment. Brandy Orton, who was the original director of the Aging Next, or the Village, gave me a slide that showed the demographics. And you have to think, anybody that was born in 1950 is 72 this year. Well, if you start talking about people receiving senior services at between 65 and 70, that tsunami of age groups is just hitting now. And as was brought out by Ms. Neil Yoakum, a lot of people cannot afford even the Village, which has a relatively modest fee, but it is a fee, and it is upfront a middle class organization designed at the middle class. And this large, we're told all the time of the few people who've really prepared for retirement. And so we're going to have to look to more organized help for seniors. And the other thing I think we have to do, and this was brought up a bit, is you got to have a real conversation with your children, because, and it's a two-way street. one reason we moved to California was to be near someone who is a caregiver. So they wouldn't have to be worrying about caregiving across the continent. On the other hand, we cannot expect them to be caregivers 100% of the time when they're fully employed. So as I say, it's a two-way conversation that needs to go. And I think it's something that needs to be planned.
That's why the village helps.
And the village really helps on this. And it helps with isolation a lot.
I'm glad you brought up the two-way conversation. I've spent all these decades researching caregiving, actually with my mother. My mother is a gerontologist and was a professor for decades and retired as a dean from New Mexico State University. And then I started showing signs of dementia. So how ironic is that? But you don't plan for that, but you can plan for that. And so even if you are prepared for aging and you have, and financially and psychologically and all of those things, which they were, there are things that happen that can throw a loop in that. And so, being able to cast a wide net in terms of what your aging can look like is important, but also keeping those lines of communication open to everybody, with everybody who will be impacted and affected by that is important. Yeah. Brian.
One
Yeah,
last,
I
one
was,
last,
sorry,
one
Bill.
last comment, and that is for all the other people on this video or Zoomcast, and that is within the Foothills area or the greater Claremont area. If you have any question about aging or aging facilities or resources, call Floyd. She is the encyclopedia of
Okay.
knowledge when it comes. She won't necessarily give you the answer, but I can guarantee, tell you where to go to get the answer.
That's right.
Thanks, Bill.
That's the other important part of aging. I'm sorry, Brian, is that, it's important to remember that, those who hold the key to the institutional memory and history and have all of that information, and to just, ignore that, we do that at our peril.
Mhm.
Brian.
I was just going to say that, Floyd and I were talking a little bit earlier as we were preparing, and I was just sharing at a very basic level. I am one of those adults who is caring for kids under 18, but I'm also thinking about my parents who are in their mid to late 70s. And so watching this aging process happen, and I forget who, I think many people were sharing this or nodding in agreement, is that, gosh, well, what is that role and responsibility? Checking myself, I'm fortunate that being part of a community, a mainline denomination for however we got there, there are a lot of good friends and good people that I have met and model what aging looks like in all senses of it. They show me what it is to live in a health facility. They show me what it is to live independently. They show me what it's like to have younger family members who are nearby and those who are across the country. And so, I'm just getting into that phase where, I'm watching my parents age and the things that come along with it, the signs that, oh, I wonder if they should be doing this or shouldn't be doing that. But then my role is like, gosh, I don't think I'm allowed to say that, or I'm just their child. I shouldn't say that. Or how do I find a tactful way to show I'm caring about this area of their life?
Mhm. Mhm.
It is hard. So actually, I had a friend of mine years ago wrote a really great book on, she was at UMass Boston. I think it was called Taking the Keys Away, or it was the discussion about driving, right? And within, and that was the main part of the book that she wrote. But within that are all of those really hard discussions.
Mhm.
And as children, I find when I go, and I have been going back every month, which is exhausting, and why we need to get my parents out here, because I have a career, I have my own life, but here's what happens when I go back there. And I'm going to be 55 this week. I'm 55. My mom just turned 74. What happens is I go in and they have the bedroom ready for me and I'm like 15 again. Right? So, and this is what I'm a researcher and I'm a professor, but I walk into that house and I'm like, oh, yay, you have my room ready. Okay. You know, and I'm 15 again. So you bring up a real, oh no, of course. I'm sorry for the noise in the background. It's a dog. It's not a human. So you're exactly right, Brian, that those remembering our roles, which, you know, in the slides or somewhere in the slides is, you know, to check your expectations and know yourself. But also, you know, go get resources. It doesn't have to all be on you. And that's why Aging Next is there. That's why in every community, there's an area agency on aging. You know, there are close to 700 area agencies on aging around the country. And no matter where you live, especially if you're somebody's doing long distance caregiving, there's help. But you have to admit, right? Like we were talking about, you have to identify as a caregiver, not a child of your aging parents. When you realize that that is impacting your life in such a way that it's becoming either something you're getting annoyed by, or you're feeling stretched by, or anything, we really need to kind of normalize this, and that is therein lies one of the problems.
Yeah.
Now, Bill.
The one thing first to Professor Neil Yoakum, you can be 85, and if your parents are still alive, you'll still be 15 in some sense. It's part of parenting, as you well know. But no, the point is, this is where, you know, dealing with your parents as they grow old and your children as you grow old is sort of like sex. People don't talk about it, but they all want to know about it and things like this. And so, you know, this discussion between what you should do, and it's got to be down and dirty, and it's got to be very honest on both sides. Is which side? I mean, each side has a certain expectations, and if you sort of ignore these expectations, or you sort of are worried, you either worry too much about them or ignore them, both sides are going to be unhappy. So it's a conversation that's got to be had, and it's growing old, and death is part of the process.
That's right.
And you just got to face up to it, because you'll all be happier in the long run.
That's right.
And
you
you
know,
can't Google the conversation. But, you know, you can Google the conversation, and it talks about, you know, how to ask those hard questions as you're having that conversation, Brian, with your dad driving, how to start the conversation and to get some good pointers on it. But it is called The Conversation.
I think for me, I would say it's I never quite know what I'm responsible for. I have a 90-year-old father. My mom, she died last year at 90. But I go see him, you know, a couple times a week, every week. And he's a very important man in the place where he lives, and through his life, he achieved a lot. So a lot of his friends are around. And, you know, I'm always being told, your dad shouldn't be doing this. Why is your dad? My dad still drives, and that is really scary. But anyway, why is your dad driving? You should be. Why don't you? And it's like, for me, my dad is he's a very stubborn. I mean, he's stubborn in ways I never knew existed to be stubborn about, and I have to play a very, very subtle kind of game just to get power of attorney over certain things. So at least I can watch finances. He has stuff beginning with dementia. It's a constant game. So, but I always feel, you know, you always feel kind of responsible. It's almost like he is my, like, I don't want to say child, but it's sort of, there's something like that. It's kind of like a family responsibility. And I'm the one of my siblings. I'm the one that is here. But on the other hand, I have to say to myself, I can't do anything about this. You know, he's an adult. He's making these choices. If this may kill him, but I can't stop him from doing it. You know, it's like this is really the constant tension back and forth between his independence, my responsibility for him. Like his doctor one time said to me, "Okay, it's time for you to step up to the plate." I have no idea what the step, and
Yeah.
I think I'm supposed to take this really seriously, but I don't know what that would mean because he's his own adult. And but so for me, I feel a lot of that kind of autonomy versus dependence, that kind of, it's a constant sense of trying to be respectful, but trying to be realistic. I don't know. I think it's one of the hardest things. When my mom was alive, it was a double, you know. But that's one of the hardest things is when to intervene, how to intervene, can I intervene, should I intervene, you know.
It's that tension between risk and autonomy, right? So, and when do you take something away from somebody? And the hardest thing, very similar to you, Brad, was driving with my mom. My mom can't drive anymore, but she thinks she can. And my mom has spent her entire life being in charge, being in, and she's very, very independent. And so it was a little bit of a battle, and I would cry, and I would, my dad would say, "Oh, what happened? What happened? Take a walk with me. Let me make you a drink and we'll talk about it." And so when I finally took my ego, right, which is to kind of check your expectations. My students work, for example, a lot with at Hillcrest, at Southwoods, with the folks that are there who have dementia. And I always remind them, this is not about you. Check your ego at the door. Go in without any expectations, because some of it's going to be hard, some of it's going to be fun, it's going to be great. And so I actually had to, relearn some of that myself and be the student. And so I had to figure out a way to be able to drive her, so my dad didn't have to drive us everywhere and drop us off. And so I started saying, "Mom, you know what? I really, really love this car. I really love this Mercedes. Nobody has a station wagon Mercedes. I'd love to drive you. Can I drive you? I don't get to drive this much." And she's like, "Oh, fine. That's fine." And I do have to listen to, slow down. And so we have the little back and forth, like, "Mom, I am 50 something. I never have had an accident." So we still have that mother-daughter stuff, but I'm driving and she's not driving. And oftentimes it's just, I don't know, it's exhausting.
But the problem as you get old.
We'll get to Jim. We'll get to Jim after Bill.
You're in control. Okay. You've been professor of this. You've been a CEO. You've just run a household. You kept you managed your kids to grow up and things like that.
Yeah.
And so the thought of losing control.
Yep, that's what it is.
About one of the scariest things you can face.
Yeah.
And so again, driving is one of those symbols in our society of independence.
Yeah, it's the ultimate symbol of it. Yeah.
So the one thing that Aging Next does, Village, is provide rides. Or for now, we got Uber and Lyft. So, if you, and they're not terribly expensive. They're not like taxis used to be or were. And so, I think these are the conversations you need to have and understand that a lot of this is coming from sort of the fear of getting old and losing, being in control. But also, sort of had that frank discussion and try to work out alternatives that keeps them as much of their control as they can, but maintains their safety and public safety and what else?
Right. And the hard part is, the kind of, the muddy part of it is the personality and the person part of it, as Brad reminds us. So Jim, you've had your hand up.
I'm just curious, a couple of threads have picked this up. Brad's conversation with me originally, we were talking about this too, and you've mentioned it, Kelly, and others, about dementia, the role of dementia in senior care, because it seems to me that dementia kicks everything into a whole new place. That is,
whole new ballgame.
Yeah, the finances of it are largely impossible unless someone has paid the price to put in place insurance for that, which is a very costly element. Everyone sort of looks at the DNA lottery and tries to figure out what their chances are and all those sorts of things. I've been working on the board at Pilgrim Place, and we're trying to put our memory care unit into operation. And the pricing on that is just bizarrely beyond anything else in the organization, of course. So what kinds of, if assuming that a family has not invested in long-term care insurance, and knowing that Medicare just simply does not care for that beyond 90 days, I think is the number. What is, I mean, and assuming that we don't want to go bankrupt to go into Medicaid, which I guess is another possibility. What options are there if we face for ourselves? I'm going to get old one of these days. I'm saying it jokingly as a 73-year-old. And but I mean, or for elderly parents or for whoever, what are our options with that? Or what kinds of directions do you point people in?
Well, and my parents, made a really good living and they planned really well, but they did not plan for dementia. And they would be destitute, not long after, if we had to, place my mother somewhere. And so it's really, the social model of adult day health, which is what Aging Next provides. That is going to be, I mean, I hope to have my mother there. She'll think she's in charge of it and everybody's there, just teaching them or something. But, I really hope that we're kind of turning a corner on this aspect of elder care and how we handle it, because so much of it is out of reach for so many people. And it's just not sustainable when you look at the numbers.
We're talking about $11,000 a month, for instance.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
it's not an unusual number.
Right. And so you're, there's really, there's one side of it. There's, there's a Medi-Cal bed, or there is, the high end, which is actually just, should be considered regular care. And there's nothing in between, except for families, and families are the default long-term care system in this country. And it's going to snap in half. It's not, we cannot sustain it anymore. So I don't have an answer for you, Jim, but it goes back to what everybody's talked about, which is planning. And if you're lucky to have lots of siblings, my brother died, a long time ago. And now that my mom has dementia, oftentimes I'm swearing at him, like, damn, what? Are you leaving with this? So if, depending on the makeup of the family, oftentimes people can figure it out. But my grandmother also had vascular dementia, which is what my mother has. So it's very scary for me and my female cousins. But having a lot of siblings does not always mean that it's always going to work out, because my mom was one of 5 and she was the only one caring for her mom. So it's conversations, it's piecing together and patching together what you can personally, but then knowing what's available in your community and turning to organizations like Aging Next, because so many people try to do it on their own. Right. Because, gerontology, aging is, we don't do good at marketing. So not a lot of people are aware of the services in their community. And that's kind of the duty of us that do know to spread that word, because people are trying to piece it together. So that's not really a great answer, but that's all I have right now.
Oh, right. Thank you. It just seems to be that the challenge, even if you have respite care for care workers, I like that terminology, but if they're family members, they're still trying to carry on a career. They're still there, and how I encountered a woman on the street here in Claremont one day during a walk who came up to me and said, my husband has been trapping me in the house. And she went through a whole narrative of the oppression of her husband. I don't know him anymore. He's just changed. And we talked for a long time. And I was aware that she was very agitated and wouldn't be very good to leave her in this state. I had no idea what to do. I mean, I can't kidnap her or anything. I can't get my car and take her somewhere. And fortunately, her husband caught up with her, and he just calmly explained to me that she had dementia.
Yep.
And she wasn't going to go with him. We're having a scene. Fortunately, they were members of the local Catholic parish, and the priest knew them well. And she agreed if she could go see the priest. So she let me take her in the car, and her husband came in their car, and the priest sort of mediated the whole thing. But it was an amazing example to me of an extreme case. But she's been locked up in her house, according to her narrative.
Yep.
And the poor husband was beside himself, and he was senior himself, of course. So tremendous.
But, it's not an uncommon situation. My mom would call and say, your dad, I can't go anywhere. Your dad got rid of my car. So I call my Dad, what the hell's, what is going, that was the wrong word to use in this group. I'm so sorry. What the heck? I said, what the heck is going on? And he's like, her car is in the garage. Her car's in the garage. It's just, and my dad is lonely. He's articulating that now. So for the husband of the woman that you met, these are very, talk about isolation. These are very isolating and exhausting and very sad. My dad has to sell their Airstream now. Their dream was to travel around with their classic Airstream and do all of this stuff. And so there are so many layers to the dementia part of it when you talk about aging and care and aging and the psychological aspect. And so, yeah, it's a whole, I don't know if anybody knows Dr. Ryan Harrison, but Ryan and I did a 4-part series in the meeting house at Hillcrest on dementia. We called it the Dementia Cafe. And it was 4 parts, really talking about all of these things that we're talking about here. It's just this, totally integral part of aging, but it's something that sadly is not normalized. I would like to see us have a dementia, Claremont, for example, become a dementia-friendly community so that we could have trainings and workshops, maybe through Aging Next. That could be something that we do, which is educating bank tellers and cashiers and frontline, the
Firemen and policemen.
exactly, so that we know what we're seeing when we see it, and that's what a dementia-friendly community does, is that we, it's out in the open and we normalize it and we know how to handle it, and it's no longer scary or something we don't talk about. So that is one part of kind of educating the public about dementia that would help us kind of down that road. Oh, Bill.
I just say something. When I was communicating with Floyd, she sent me a link to the master plan aging for California. That was an amazing document, and I really appreciated just reading the sort of plan. I mean, then there's all these strategies and all sorts of things, but I just read through the plan. And what struck me, and it strikes me here with what Jim was saying, and you have been saying, Floyd and Kelly, that it's like a systemic sort of thing. If you want to solve one problem, there's a whole gob of other. I mean, some of it's pretty sobering in that report. It sounds like there's going to be like a $3 million person deficit in child care. I mean, caregiving, care workers, and nobody wants to do the job really, because the people who are doing the job are themselves living in poverty because it doesn't pay them anything. And so, but many of the people who need the care are also close to or in poverty, so they can't really afford to pay more. And you start realizing that these are not just sort of simple issues. I mean, they are individually. We just work them out. You try to work them out. But when I read the master plan, you could tell this was a very. I mean, it's sort of like everything from transportation to The internet, we need to get people more connected, but my dad has no idea how to use the internet. He forgot within about 2 months everything he knew about the internet, and without me helping him, so it's all these personal things and all these systemic issues of economics and housing, and it just strikes me just so some of these basic questions, how quickly we start moving into very large systemic issues. I mean, it's interesting, but it's kind of sobering at the same time, that it's a large problem.
Bill.
Couple of things. One thing, in Claremont, there is the Committee on Aging. And I served on that for a number of years. And it is a good point as for the city of Claremont and those who are residents there, to challenge the Committee on Aging to come up with these training programs and things like this, because they have a group of people on it that represent a whole variety of resources for aging people in the community. The one thing I learned by serving on that committee is that although the aging problem is regional, in other words, living in Upland, I have very little access personally to the services of the Committee of Aging in Claremont, because it's designed to serve the Claremont residents, and rightly so. And Upland has its own, and Rancho has its own, and there's a sort of a lack of coordination. The other thing is, and somebody brought this up before, is the PR part of it. Aging Next Village, I've always said, is one of the greatest ideas in the area that nobody's ever heard of. You go down the street and you ask people about Aging Next Village, and I'll bet you if you could find 1 in 100 that even know about it, you'd be lucky. And that's sad. But it's not unusual. And what I'm saying about Aging Next Village, I think is true of most of the senior programs. I mean, you take the senior daycare that Aging Next runs. Again, that's a really critical program to give relief to caregivers. And I mean, again, I'll bet you if you walk down the street, 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000 might know about it. And there needs to be more publicity. And the other point that needs to come up, as citizens, we need to start deciding as a community whether we're going to have some government funding on this. It's part of that discussion of whether we should have universal medical care coverage or what we're going to do. But the aging part of the population is going to be a major fraction. Back in the 30s, not 65 was chosen for Social Security because half the people were dead by then.
We didn't live that long. That's right. That's right. Well, I know we're running out of time here, but I just, I'll say one last thing that kind of Bill and Brad and Jim, everybody who has kind of, we're all preaching to the choir here, but I feel very strongly and passionately about the fact that a lot of the issues that are going to be really kind of coming at us hot and heavy, they've been kind of, inching their way to us, right? But they're upon us now more and more. And that is treating this particular population as separate from the rest of the population. And so, looking at the care, looking at caregivers, looking at all of the different ways in which aging can manifest itself, whether it's dementia. And so it's this thing over here that we don't want to talk about because we're not old yet. And for politicians to get them on board, it's only if they've experienced it or they have a personal experience with it. So I don't know how that happens to really get, the UN and the World Health Organization promote age-friendly communities, similar to age-friendly dementia. But age-friendly communities are communities who are dedicated to making their communities friendly to all ages. For example, a cutout and a sidewalk. A cutout and a sidewalk is good for a baby stroller, is good for a wheelchair, is good for somebody like me who doesn't pay attention. Those are all, there are ways to address this, but unfortunately we see it as so separate. And so that's, I guess, the work ahead of us.
We could just keep going.
No, let's stop.
Well, thank you so much, Floy and Kelly, for participating in this conversation. Brad, thank you for reaching out to Floy, and I know that you have been in lots of conversations with Floy and setting up this conversation, and so I can tell that we are almost at 8:30, which means that this was a good conversation to have. So thank you again for leading us in this conversation, for addressing our questions, for engaging us. I also wanted to share, yes, Joe, you have the right idea. Let's applaud them. Sharing your wealth and decades of experience is just amazing, and we're very fortunate to have been listening to just a part of that. I made note of a couple of books that I think I need to go and just flip through. So thank you. And then for others and for Floy and Kelly, that this is part one of two parts, a two-part series on aging and spirituality. And we wanted intentionally to have this conversation first, because this is where we kind of get theory and praxis and see what's happening in the community, especially our local communities. And then on Sunday, so coming up on the 6th at 8:45 in the morning, we will be gathering in the sanctuary and live streaming it on our Facebook page for the church. Delight will be sharing with us more about the work that she's been doing as congregational care coordinator, and also her studies and her work with the Certificate in Spirituality and Aging, which is a partnership with the New Theological Seminary of the West. And so Delight is preparing, and I know that she and I are going to have a conversation soon to make sure that that those who are listening, who are there in the sanctuary or online, really get to know not just the local work that's happening, but the very personal and real work with our friends and our family members within the congregation. So we invite you to that again Sunday morning, 8:45 a.m., either in the sanctuary or and on our live stream on Facebook. All right. Oh, Karen has something to share. No? Was she waving goodbye? She's waving goodbye. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you again, everybody. And we will see you around.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Kelly and Flo.